Unique New York. Unique New York.
Why are you saying that?
How now, brown cow?
Fischers Fritz frischt, fischt frische Fische.
Oh, is that
Frische Fische fischt frische Fischers Fritz. Hello, friends. Welcome back to our episode 2 of hopefully many, where we talk about psychedelics and life and spirituality and all the shit that we find interesting and that our life kind of centers around a little bit, and that makes our life better, and also arguably makes the life of a lot of other people a lot better too.
Yeah, I hope so. Welcome back to our professional recording studio, and welcome back to all of the podcast listeners.
Welcome. So today I want to tackle a topic that is maybe not the sexiest in the space of psychedelics, but it is very important, and that is psychedelics and safety. And we're going to talk about why that is such an important topic and why you should take it seriously and why you really want to have a think about all of these things before you go on a big trip, before you go into a ceremony space, before you go on a retreat. Because these are beautiful medicines and also therapeutic methods to change your life for the better. But if not done intentionally, and if not done in the right, and especially if not done in a safe setting, they can really fuck shit up in a very bad way.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an important thing to talk about because psychedelics are growing so much in popularity and becoming so mainstream that you now have so many more people interested in this who otherwise previously knew nothing about it. And I think there is a problem that we are probably kind of guilty of painting these things with kind of like rose-colored glasses, of saying like, yeah, psychedelics solve all of our problems and like society needs this, which I do really believe, but they also need to be used with respect and used safely. And at the end of the day, they're a tool just like anything else. And, you know, with a hammer, you can build a beautiful house, or you can hit yourself in the dick with it. And we don't want people hitting themselves in the dick with psychedelics.
No, ideally not.
Great analogy, right?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I couldn't have put it better. So basically the whole idea with this is, and I love what you're saying about that there is this kind of rose-colored, I feel like there's actually like two things. Like one of them is all psychedelics are bad and mushrooms are on the same scale as meth, essentially, or...
Whoever's listening to this probably isn't in that bucket, or else they wouldn't be listening to this.
That's true.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But this is just from a perception that for example, when I talk about, I've used mushrooms or I smoke cannabis, there is still a perception of I'm a bad person now, or I am kind of unhinged or mentally unstable because I do that, completely disregarding that I'm a much better person because of it. But there's a lot of nuances to all of this, and this is not really about talking about the whole reefer madness and the war on psychedelics. But the other part, what you're saying about there is this rose-colored or just glorified image of psychedelics, is also not good, because, and this is something that I really want to get into, is with the rise of psychedelics and with the rise in popularity, that there are so many centers, so many practitioners, and so many people popping up that call themselves gurus, that call themselves shamans, medicine man, medicine woman, where some of them absolutely rightfully so, because they've actually undergone training and they've actually worked with it and have a background and the experience.
Sure.
But
I think 99 times out of 100, if a white dude is calling himself a shaman,
yes,
you should quickly run the other direction.
Yes, and this is also my experience, the people that I've worked with in that space, who are some of the absolute most people with the most integrity and the most like ethical approach around it, would never call themselves that. And the only people that I have seen who do that are people who absolutely should not have any business in giving you any substance, let alone take care of you in that space.
So we'll talk all about this in a minute of like finding a reputable center and, you know, how to choose someone to sit with. But first, I think we wanted to talk about like who are these things not for? Because again, we talk all the time about how everyone needs this and it's going to heal everyone, but there's certainly a subset of the population who has no business doing psychedelics. So can you talk to me a little bit about who should not be using these medicines, and maybe if someone is thinking about it, what are some questions they should ask themselves, or some almost kind of screening questions they could ask to determine if this is something they should pursue or not?
Absolutely. I think that is one of the biggest ones, is that first of all, there's so many different psychedelics, and in general, they will all vary a little bit between the substance. So LSD is different than psilocybin. Psilocybin is different than ayahuasca. Ayahuasca will be different than bufo. But overarching, there are some general questions and concerns that one should address before taking any substance in general. And one of the biggest things, and this is a huge red flag, if you encounter someone who calls themselves a medicine practitioner or a shaman or even a center, and they don't have any sort of intake assessment that talks about your mental health history, that talks about your actual physical health and conditions that you have or had in the past, medications that you're taking, run. Because it's not just a matter of you can have a bad trip, but depending on the medicine, depending on the psychedelic, you could get seriously hurt or even die. And this is not to deter anyone from it, but this is a reality that actually needs to be talked about. And it's not just, oh, anyone should do ayahuasca, anyone should do, or like everyone should do ayahuasca, everyone should do psilocybin, because that's just absolutely not true. And within the right setting, with the right people, I think that psychedelics can be a huge part of just raising consciousness and healing people on a mental, physical, spiritual, emotional level. But realistically, there's a lot of people who should not touch psychedelics.
So again, who are those people? Like, what are the conditions?
Conditions are especially a history of schizophrenia in the family, history of having schizophrenia yourself, bipolar disorder, being in a state of mentally being really unstable. So if you're in a really dark place, like manic depressive, if you are suicidal, there's a good chance that psychedelics will amplify all of that. And that's not good. And there are people who come to the medicines or come to psychedelics from a place of there's either no intake or there's just such a desperation of trying something that they will just jump into it without considering the risks. And there are people who commit suicide after doing psychedelics, and that is a very real thing. And again, not to scare people away, but I do think it's really important to talk about because it does happen.
Yeah, I think some of that maybe just like societal or cultural perception of what psychedelics are, I think some of that was overblown in like the 60s and 70s and 80s with like the anti-drug campaigns.
Oh, absolutely.
But it is a real thing. So like with schizophrenia, for example, you know, I'm not an expert on this, but a lot of times it's latent in somebody until maybe they're like early to mid 20s and maybe there's some sort of life stress situation that triggers it.
Yes.
And so it's been latent in them the whole time, and it's just waiting for some sort of
a trigger, basically.
Yeah, trigger, like an emergency of some sort that triggers it. And oftentimes LSD or some other psychedelic can be that thing that triggers it. And yeah, unfortunately that does happen because people aren't screening for this, or people don't know this, and there are certain people out there. So if you have a family history of something like that, you really should not just be diving into doing psychedelics without really considering this risk a lot further. And same thing that you said, someone, say, with manic depression who is in a very unstable place right away, they might turn to psychedelics thinking that it's the answer because they've heard that it cures so many people or that it can treat these things. And maybe it is for you when you are in a more stable position, when you've worked with a psychologist or psychiatrist or integration coach to prepare for it. But it's certainly not something to just dive into when you're starting from a very unstable place. Because these psychedelics, they can really, for someone who already has a tenuous grasp on reality, they can really push you off that fucking deep end where you completely lose touch with what is real and what is imagined and what is actually going on and what is a hallucination, and that can absolutely cause some real issues. So for someone, I feel like that's almost a good way to think about it. Like if your grasp on reality is already kind of shaky, this probably isn't for you right now.
Yes, I 100% agree. And I've seen several people where that happened, and it's not pretty. Like it's really, really awful. And it takes, if you come back from it, which some people don't, it takes a long, long time to integrate. It takes a long time to land back in actual reality and not be stuck in this space where you don't know what's real and what is not.
And it's tricky and it's unfortunate because those are people who stand to benefit so much from the actual healing power that these things have, but they're also the people who can be harmed the most by it.
Yeah.
So how does one maybe know that they're ready, or how does one go about choosing a facilitator or a center to work with? And maybe someone who is questioning if this is a good thing for them or not, like how do they move forward? How do they navigate this?
Well, before we get into that, I actually just want to talk a little bit more about not just the mental part, which the other thing that I want to say is that there is a tendency where especially the people who actually are bipolar or have a history of schizophrenia, and this comes up in the intake process, and they're like, oh, I kind of fall into that, but I'm sure I'll be fine. Please reconsider, because we've had, when I've worked at centers, people will lie on the intake, and it is not good for anyone involved. Trust me. Like if you are not sure, if you have if you are on medication like that, there is such I don't know, there's just a much bigger process for you to be ready. It's not a matter of like you will never be ready. Schizophrenia, I would argue you shouldn't just at all, and that's what all my teachers are saying. Like everyone that I've trained under is just, if in doubt, you should not, essentially. And I think that is where there comes responsibility in from the individual who's doing it, because as a center practitioner, yes, ideally you will have a screening process, but as the person doing it, I really, really encourage everyone to think about, is this something that I would fall under?
Right, yeah, and be honest with it
and be honest with it, and not just lie, because people on both ends, that's the thing, like people on both ends will lie for their own gain, essentially. And
sorry, so you wanted to talk for a moment about like physical conditions?
Yes. So the other thing is that depending on the psychedelic, that there are a number of physical conditions that are where you're not supposed to do psychedelics for a number of reasons. So for example, when you're drinking ayahuasca, there's a whole, like a massive list of prescription drugs that you cannot be on and that can't have been on for weeks at times. So for example, SSRIs, you need to be off for at least 6 weeks before doing ayahuasca for your system to actually clear that drug out of your system.
Yeah, I feel like SSRIs and MAO inhibitors are kind of the two main categories of drugs that interact the most with psychedelics.
Yes. And that's not all psychedelics, that's certain ones. Ayahuasca, for example.
I think the majority of psychedelics, and again, not all of them, but one of their main mechanisms by which they work is influencing like the serotonin system. So serotonin is one of your neurotransmitters, and a lot of psychedelics interact with that in one way or another. So if you're already on an SSRI, what that's doing is preventing the reuptake of that neurotransmitter in your brain. So basically allowing your brain to have more serotonin in it already. And then if you go ahead and take a psychedelic, or especially something like MDMA, which then floods your brain with even more serotonin, there's something called serotonin syndrome, where if your brain actually has too much of that, that causes a whole host of problems in terms of like blood pressure regulation, muscle activity, and things like that. And again, reading some of the literature, it seems like serotonin syndrome is almost, it's not as big of a risk as people make it out to be. But it is a real thing. Like, it's a real chemical thing that does occur because of the interaction of these drugs. And it's something I think you're rather safe than sorry, because it is a fatal, or can be a fatal condition. So it's not something to be taken lightly.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's in terms of prescription medication. Those are the two big ones, SSRIs and MAOI inhibitors. And that is where, again, like the intake is really important, and the preparation period as well. Because, again, for example, with ayahuasca, you should be off of SSRIs for 6 weeks. So if you are on antidepressants, if you've taken antidepressants, or if you know anyone who has and then has weaned off of them, it's not like you can just stop taking them.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the other thing. You have to wean off, and you have to do that over the course of a couple of weeks. And ideally, you work with a psychologist during that time, or with your therapist, because the adverse effects of you coming off of SSRIs is sometimes awful. A lot of times it is.
And then let's say you come off of it and they're not in your system, so now we're not worried about that actual chemical interaction in your brain. But guess what? Your entire psychology has changed now that you're off of the SSRIs. And maybe now that's pushed you into that category of someone who maybe shouldn't be taking it just because of their mental state. Yeah. So it is important to allow enough time for, one, for the drug to literally clear your system, but two, for kind of your psyche to stabilize in this new state, and make sure that once you've come off of it, this is still the right thing for you to do going forward.
Yeah. And that is, especially if you are on SSRIs and you come off of it, and then you are in that period between, okay, it's now been 6 weeks and I've got my retreat coming up, or I've got my ceremony coming up, to, in that time, really closely work with somebody to help you prepare for it, because the risk of you falling into a depression, the risk of you not doing so well in that period is relatively high. So, and it is, like when you do it the right way, in the sense of you honor your own body, you honor your own health and well-being, you honor the actual chemical interaction between your drugs and the drug that you're about to take, and you approach it with reverence, it is, from what I've seen, absolutely life-changing in a very good way. But there are just a lot of safety factors that are to be considered, and especially, and this is why I kind of want to stay on this topic of the SSRIs a little bit longer, because they are prescribed like candy these days. And that is in a lot of times, and this is from a personal experience, this is from experience within my family, from clients that I've worked with, where the approach of a lot of doctors and psychologists and psychotherapists is not to actually treat the underlying cause of why am I depressed, why am I feeling shitty, but this is the easiest option for me to just give you something that will mask your symptoms and make you feel better. And also the incentive, especially in the United States, where people get a lot of money for prescribing that. So it is like the epidemic of SSRIs and just antidepressants is a real thing. So there's, where, for example, like 10 years ago, I didn't really know anyone who was on antidepressants. And now every third person that I meet is just taking that for something that they could probably tackle, or very well could tackle, without that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well stated. One other just physical,
just becoming
health.
aware of how fucked up everything is as I'm talking. I'm like, oh fuck, there's so much.
Just one other physical condition to touch on is heart issues and blood pressure issues. So I actually, leading up to our last ayahuasca retreat, it came up in our intake where someone had high blood pressure, I think, and had a heart condition, and it led me doing just all of this research into the actual literature that's out there. And this is part of the unfortunate reality of these drugs being banned for so long is that we don't have very good research on these things. But one article that I did find was really interesting. It measured the blood pressure and heart rate response of people taking ayahuasca. And this is true of a lot of psychedelics, that it does increase heart rate, it does increase blood pressure, basically increases like the physiologic kind of stress response. The article that I found said that it wasn't too intense. It was maybe a max blood pressure increase of like 10 points, which for the average young, healthy person is totally manageable. But if you are someone with a heart condition or already with high blood pressure, where raising your blood pressure further is a concern for you, then it's absolutely something to just be aware of. And I would say talk to your doctor, but most doctors won't know about this or won't think too highly of it. But it's absolutely not something to lie about on the intake.
No,
right? That is something,
absolutely not.
That is something that your facilitators and that the people that you're working with need to know. And again, we'll talk about finding qualified people. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely like to know if one of our guests has a potential heart condition so that we can pay a little extra attention to them, you know?
Yeah, and again, out of experience, it is not fun for anyone involved if you lie on the intake.
Yeah, no.
Again,
That's the moral of this story.
it's
is
pretty awful.
Find a site that has an intake process and don't lie to them about it.
Please, yeah, that I feel like it should be common sense, but it's just not. So please honor. That's the thing too. Honor the people who are when you find a place that does it the right way, that really cares about your well-being, and they're not just doing that out of shits and giggles to be like, oh, we want to, make this really hard for you, but it's like because they actually care and about you being safe and about you being healthy and not causing any damage. So please give those centers, like when they actually do care, please don't fuck that up.
Yeah. Anything else to touch on in terms of like health history and things like that, or shall we move on to finding a center?
Yeah, I think that's, so just to recap on psychedelics and safety in the intake assessment. If you are working with psychedelics, if you are considering, there absolutely should be an intake assessment, which should be a mental health history and not just a form, but then actually having a conversation with a facilitator, having a conversation with the intake person who kind of like clears you and gives the green light for you to do that retreat. Or also respect that if you do that and they're like, hey, I think maybe there's some further steps you should be taking before coming on this retreat or before having this experience, and to take that seriously as well. And that is a sign of integrity when people will not take you on because they don't think you're ready yet.
Right, and actually listen to that and don't just go and find another center that will take you.
Yeah, and we've had that as well, where there was something about the intake and was like, oh, but I don't want to do this. Like, you will not find a center that operates ethically and with integrity that will not ask this question and will have you agree to these terms.
Yeah, it's definitely a sign of just the integrity and the intention of the location that you're going to.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I know here in Mexico, just anecdotally, of some quote-unquote shamans that do these ceremonies just like one day at a time with like 50 participants. I doubt there's a big screening process there other than paying for it.
Yeah. And just from that, to spin that anecdotal story a little bit further, because I know what you're talking about, is that especially with ayahuasca, where it's, oh, let's do ayahuasca, you hear about it on a Tuesday, and then let's do ayahuasca on Friday. Like, don't. Like, just people taking you in this closely to a ceremony, that is also a red flag with some medicines, because there's no chance for you to prepare, and it's not even a matter of just the physical considerations, but also, are you actually mentally ready for it? Are you ready to do that? And it could be fine, but it's a big thing, and to give yourself just the space and the time to prepare for that, and to ask yourself, what am I actually wanting to work on? What are my intentions?
So in terms of like red flags for, let's say someone has asked themselves these questions, they've determined that they're ready to look for a center, they feel called to the medicine. I think one red flag obviously is that a center would have no intake process. What else would jump out to you where if you see something, you're like, I shouldn't go to this place?
A big thing is transparency. So kind of asking either, because a lot of centers these days, they will have websites, they have a mission statement, they will show you who are the people that are facilitating, what is their background, where do they get the medicine from, where have they trained, and just kind of what are essentially like what is included, like what is the preparation process, what is the integration process, where can you find more resources, where can you find more support, and that is a really good sign. So, but that is more for centers, I would argue, than for independent practitioners. And with that, if there is no conversation around your intentions, if there's no conversation around what you're actually getting, where they source the medicine from, what makes them qualified to do this. Because, and that's kind of the other thing, what I've seen, especially on social media, the people who are promoting it the most and with the most ethereal terms, and a lot of times those are the people that you should not work with, because it's kind of this all fluff and nothing behind.
So you mean someone who sat in ceremony one time and then changed their name to Divine Goddess Angel?
Yes.
You don't think that they're a certified ayahuasca practitioner?
No, I do not.
Oh, what if they sat with ayahuasca 4 times?
Oh, that's a totally different story, dude. That's different then. No, but
I'm sorry, I'm making light of this, but this is a real fucking
Yeah.
thing where someone will sit in ceremony
Yeah.
like twice and then think, oh, the ayahuasca has chosen me to serve it to others. Meanwhile, our actual maestros in Peru have literally grown up around the ayahuasca culture from the time they were fucking born. They were around this medicine. They spent literal years in the dieta, so fasting and meditating and praying with these plants. They've cultivated a relationship with it. Chances are pretty good that their mother or father was an ayahuasquero who taught
most
them
of the
as well.
times, yeah, whole lineage.
Yeah, so like, that's like cool, but like you could totally sit for like 2-3 ceremonies and then be good to serve it too.
Oh yeah, it's the exact same thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's a huge red flag. And again, it depends a little bit on the medicine, but that's the qualification piece where please ask. Like when you find an independent practitioner, it doesn't matter how amazing it sounds. Please ask, like, where did you learn? How much experience do you have with this medicine? What are your credentials? And there is a piece about people not being trauma informed at all, people not knowing where it's like, yeah, I can maybe trips it for
Absolutely.
a trip that is fun and dandy, but there's a lot of shit that comes up. There's a lot of physical challenges that can come up in this space. There's a lot of serious, like, mental issues that can come up in this space. And then it gets to the point where if that person is not equipped and trained to deal with that, it's not good.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up actually, because I was focusing so much on the ayahuasca piece, but you definitely see this with psilocybin and LSD. Like, for example, I've been a trip sitter for a number of friends. I've kind of guided you in ceremony, but fuck no, I would not guide someone else. Like, I'm not administering some sort of psychedelic therapy session. And if I ever said that I was, someone should fucking question that quite a bit, because I am not a therapist. I have zero training in it. And there are legitimate training centers out there who provide a real education on this.
Yes. And it's more, just spoiler alert, it's more than a 3-hour online course, which become a psychedelic therapist in 8 hours and pay $49.
The Instagram ads that I see for that are so concerning to me.
It's insanely concerning. So I think that is, again, I feel like we should almost have an episode where we go more into the different medicines and psychedelics, because it does vary, but in general. So, okay, here's the breakdown. With ayahuasca, again, my personal opinion, if if you didn't grow up in that culture or have trained for at
Like a
least
decade.
10 years, which means that you will be living with your maestro, you will be living in that culture, and you will be doing nothing but the medicine. This is your life. You should not be serving ayahuasca. You should not, because there's a whole thing about just westernizing it and butchering the entire culture and tradition and reverence around that. And it is not safe, especially ayahuasca, because it is so, so profound. It could be fine, but chances are if you're sitting in a living room in LA with a white dude who has a radio, that's not great.
Yeah, like best case scenario is that you trip a little bit, but it doesn't really impact your life very much. Whereas, you could have gotten so much more healing from doing it in a legitimate way.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario is, you have a complete mental break and kill yourself.
Yep. And there's no support around
Yeah.
that, because this is the other thing in terms of practitioners and centers. It's not just about, are they qualified to lead the ceremony in terms of, are they trauma informed? Do they have any sort of training? What's their background? It's not necessarily a matter of like, I need to have a PhD in psychotherapy, but what's your actual experience with it, and do you have, because like David said, there are actual credible institutions who are certifying, who are training people to do that. And it's not just, I'm a glorified trip sitter, but what's the preparation, what's the mental health aspects, what's the safety aspects around all of this, and then especially what's the integration like. So many people will be like, oh yeah, I'm totally fine, I'm just gonna give you 5 grams of mushrooms, I'm gonna sit with you and hold your hand, cool. But then guess what? You come out of that and your entire life may be falling into pieces because you had a really challenging experience, and then they are not equipped to hold you through that. They have zero resources for you, and that's where a lot of the struggle comes in. It's not necessarily just in the ceremony, but it's everything that it brings up to the surface, everything that it unearths. And this is kind of, and I was actually talking to my friend the other day who is a psychotherapist, who is a psychedelic therapist, and there's a lot of people out there who do that, but there's not many people who offer any integration, and that's so important.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think maybe we could save some of that discussion about like what actually makes a psychedelic therapist, because that's an entire topic in itself. And it's actually something I would love to interview some other people who are these therapists. Or there's an organization called Psychedelics Today that does a lot of work in this space of training, like legitimately training therapists and working as, psychotherapists who work with these medicines. And that is an entire field of its own. So I think we should maybe save that for later.
Yep.
And what else did you want to go on to talk about? You want to talk about integration now?
A little bit kind of touching upon it, but...
Or anything else that people should look for in a center? Is there anything that we missed?
Yeah. So I think like some questions to ask yourself and to just genuinely ask the center, ask the people that you're working with. Is the guide or center qualified to lead the ceremony? Do I trust them? Like, what does your gut instinct say? Because that's another thing where if it feels weird to be around them, if you feel pressured into anything, that's the other thing where if there's anyone telling you, no, you need this, and like, I will heal you.
Oh my God.
And I will, something where there's a lot of ego coming in, run, please.
Yeah. And you should ask them these questions, and any reputable center will be happy that you're asking them and happy to inform you. And you'll see right away, just like you said, is their ego coming through? So, if you ask our maestros, like, do you heal people in ceremony? Their answer is no. They're like, no, the plants do everything.
Yeah.
We're just guiding it. So if someone tells you that they're going to heal you, pretty good chance you shouldn't talk to them anymore.
Yeah, and this is actually a really good method of then screening if the person is trustworthy and if you should consider sitting with them, is to ask them the questions and see their reaction. Again, David said if they operate from a place of doing it ethically, of doing it with integrity and intentionally, they're happy to answer all your questions and they're happy to support you and to make you feel safe and comfortable until you're ready to say yes from yourself and not because they are pressuring you into it. if you ask them questions about what makes you qualified to lead this, why should I, like, where do you source your medicine from, which is another huge thing of like, oh, these are just some mushrooms. Like, yeah, but where are you getting them? Like, what is in this? And, just thinking if there's a lot of drugs or medicine out there right now that are laced with something else where you don't know what you're getting, please ask, like, where is this coming from? What makes you trust the source? And just kind of see how they react to. And again, like, if they're not willing to give you any of the answers or come with bullshit excuses like, creator told me, or like the medicine, I sat with ayahuasca once and the medicine told me that I am chosen to do this and I am the one who's supposed to heal you, and don't question the medicine space. No, like, please question, please ask. So questions you should ask, and I think we should just put them in the description below as well.
Sure.
But is the guide or center qualified to lead the ceremony? Do I trust the guide? Do I feel well prepared? Is the practitioner or center offering resources for me to prepare? Is the setting safe? And is the medicine of good quality? Where is the medicine sourced from? Am I provided with resources and support to integrate? And just in general, like, what does the process look like of after, what happens after ceremony? Who can I talk
That's
to?
great,
or
yeah.
is it just out the door and it's not my problem anymore?
Yeah. And just, I guess I want to make this distinction really clear here, because we organize and operate and facilitate these ayahuasca retreats, right? So when Cordy and I are talking about doing those things, there is a distinction between facilitating and organizing it and actually serving the medicine and holding the ceremony, right? So by no means are we fucking qualified to do that.
No, not with ayahuasca.
Not with ayahuasca, no.
Yeah.
You do that with psilocybin.
I am with psilocybin, cannabis, and breathwork because
Right.
I've gone through years of training and certifications.
You have actual training in it.
I actually do have training in it.
Yes.
And
But just
a background.
I wanted to make that distinction for the ayahuasca. So what we do is we connect people to these healers who have spent their lives working with this stuff, and we just help them operate everything smoothly. But we are not actually serving the ayahuasca in that setting.
And this is just another thing that all of the teachers and mentors that I've had, and all of my colleagues that I've worked with, which I was and am very lucky to have worked with people that have impeccable integrity in that space. And at this point, also shout out to fucking Soltara, because their facilitators and the staff are top notch. Like,
Yeah,
those are
they're
some
great.
of the most incredible people that I know in the medicine space, same as Medicinal Mindfulness, which is a ketamine and cannabis clinic in Colorado. They do an amazing, amazing job with all of their facilitators, with all of their therapists, is that none of these people would ever, just, for example, thinking about ayahuasca, like, these are people that have sat in hundreds of ceremonies sometimes, but not in their dreams they would be, oh, it is my place to serve this now and do this without a maestro and do this without the people whose culture this is from. And that's
Absolutely.
what makes me admire and appreciate them so much. And it's
Definitely.
super important.
I don't think we're doing very well at keeping these episodes bite-sized and short.
No, we're not. Sorry.
What else shall we talk about here? What else haven't we covered?
I think that's honestly it for psychedelics, because we could go into another rabbit hole about consent, which I want to do in a separate episode.
Yeah.
Because it is also a big issue in that space. But I kind of just want to recap
Sure.
very quickly. So with psychedelics and safety, again, psychedelics are not for everybody. Please do your research. Please ask questions. Please don't take this lightly, especially when it's a matter of, I do this for my actual healing. I do this to overcome trauma, to combat addiction, to just fucking self-growth and everything. Biggest things are intake assessment, collecting a history of mental health and of physical conditions that are really important. The other thing is the integrity and transparency about the practitioners about the center, what makes them qualified to lead the ceremony, what makes them trustworthy, where they're sourcing the medicine from, and what is their process from start to finish about making sure that you as the client, you as the journeyer, the traveler, is safe from start to finish, and if it's the right thing for you.
Awesome.
Dope.
Good recap.
Yeah. I think there was a little bit of banter.
So yeah, I mean,
About
if
this.
you have listened to this and have more questions coming up, if you're curious about these things, I think we're a good place to start to reach out to and ask some questions. If I don't know the answer, I'll point you in the right direction. And our door is always open to talk about this shit. This is what we love doing.
It is, very clearly. That's why we banter about it for 50 minutes probably.
So to the podcast listeners, thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for kind of being with us on this journey about talking about psychedelics and safety, about talking about psychedelics in general, and how we can make the medicine space and all of this just better and safer and more easier available to people in the right ways.
Yep. I would also say if you found this useful or enjoyed this, go ahead and please let us know in some way.
Yeah.
That would be great. I always love getting feedback on my podcast. Just helps me know that I'm doing the right things. And it would be good to know that this is actually helping people. And we'll continue sitting on the floor and recording these.
Yes. Probably in a different place in Mexico starting next week.
Probably sitting on a different floor in a different city
maybe
in Mexico.
Maybe we'll even sit on a couch. Who knows?
Wow. The possibilities are endless.
I know. It's amazing.
The world is our oyster.
But you can find a ton of information in the description below. We're going to leave a whole plethora of links for you to check out to get started. And again, if you, like David said, if you have any questions, please do reach out. We're super happy to help connect you to the right people, to give you information that you need, point you in the right direction. That's what we're here for.
Dope.
Dope.
Peace.
Peace out. Thank you.